Okay.
Tom, would you like to make the introductions?
Hello, everyone. A big welcome to our patrons who make all of this possible, and welcome to our viewers on YouTube, and a big welcome to Avraham Groll, who is the managing director of JewishGen. And JewishGen is one of the earliest Jewish organization to use the internet to connect people, to bring people together, to help them in their genealogical research. Welcome, everyone. David.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you. We're really happy for you to join us today. I was going to say obviously, but perhaps not obviously, from the sort of Sephardic side of things, and from the beginning, I should say, I have both Sephardic and Ashkenazi ancestry, except my main genealogical focus is on Sephardim. And from the Sephardic side, we see sort of groups like JewishGen and Avatenu and the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, whilst they obviously are at the sort of apex of the world of Jewish genealogy, we perhaps too often see them as both Ashkenazi and American, and Sephardic genealogy tends to be quite European, actually. I mean, I would say global as well. And we're really happy to welcome you here today because you're somebody, I think, that is understanding that there is a wider world of genealogy. And I think, especially at the moment, it's really good that all these different Jewish aspects are being pulled together. And so, perhaps to start, could you tell us about the origins of JewishGen? Who set it up? When? Why? And so on. There's sort of the prehistory, which I think many of us don't really know at all.
Yes, and first of all, David, thank you, and to you and Tan for inviting me to speak and participate in your program today. We are excited for the various opportunities of working together, and sometimes just doing these types of programs is very important, both on the JewishGen side and on your side, and being able to reach different audience than traditionally would participate in this type of series. And I really thank you for the opportunity. In terms of the question, how JewishGen got started, it's quite interesting, actually. It was started in the late 1980s by Susan King, who unfortunately passed away last year. And the way it worked, I was about 4 years old when this started. So I can't speak to personal experience, but the way it's been described to me is that people who had an interest in genealogy and Jewish genealogy really had to work hard to be able to connect with each other and to do research. It wasn't as simple as today, where you have so much available to you on the internet, and obviously there's still things that go beyond the web. But and one of the things that she recognized was the challenge of communication, and specifically that it was hard to communicate with people outside of your area. So if you wanted to connect with other genealogists, you might go to a genealogical society meeting, and you could go to a meeting and you could write your name down on a board or in a book and pass it around and see if other people recognize the name and might want to connect with you or call you or be interested in the information that you're looking for. And then they sort of created these big conferences, international conferences where people come together, and they would do similar things where they would try to get as many people together so that they could look through lists of names that maybe they could help each other um, and and come together based upon similar areas of interest. And Susan recognized that maybe there was a better way of doing that, and what she thought is to leverage technology in the late 80s to be able for people to be able to connect throughout the world. And she started like an online bulletin board, simply for the way that people can go on a computer and say, here's what I'm looking for. Can anybody help? And that's how JewishGen really got started. And it grew. It was very popular. And I remember Susan said once that, she went on a trip and she met somebody who knew her from communicating this way. And she was shocked that, JewishGen had this broad global reach. And it continued to grow, and then the bulletin board became a formal discussion group, and the website got started. The website was one of the, not the first website, but it was one of the it was a website that came towards the earlier part of the web being developed. And then over time, databases were created and developed, and then other tools were added on, and volunteers became involved. So it kind of has developed over time in a variety of ways, but it was really started by Susan, who had this vision of using technology to connect people in a way that really was not possible before. And alongside Susan were a team of interested people who shared a commitment to Jewish genealogy and to connecting Jewish people, number one, but also to preserving our history and our heritage, and to be able to be part of this, exciting initiative.
I mean,
I think yeah.
I mean, how big is it now in terms of? I mean, is there a sort of a regular staff, or is it just you and volunteers? I mean, we're quite curious actually if it's not a secret to know sort of how many regular users you have and how big your mailing list is and stuff like that. And also, to be honest, how it's funded. I mean, we're a complete shoestring operation, so.
You want all the secrets.
Well,
Um,
if they're not secret, we're happy to hear.
right, right. Well, also interesting question that's connected to what we started with. JewishGen is really fueled by volunteers. So nearly everything that you see on the website, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit in detail of how the site is structured, but nearly everything that a user will be able to benefit from is either overseen or at least created by and managed and created by volunteers. It's a very unique organization in that way, that it brings together people who, in most cases, come from different backgrounds and perspectives, who care about Jewish genealogy and fuel everything that we do. So, the answer to your question is that we have a very small staff. At any given time, we could have one full-time staff, as we do now, while we're short-staffed, usually a little bit more. Never more than 3 or 4 people right now. We have a team of consultants, and including people around the world who help us, in Ukraine or in Israel, depending on, what the function is, and many people throughout the most people throughout the United States. And that is how we operate. Then answer to your question of, how big is the database? I presume you mean of our users, not of the content.
Yes.
And how big is the mailing list? So that's also an interesting question, because there are a lot of people who kind of uh, we call them drive-by Jenners, which means that they might be interested, they might get enthusiastic. It might be around the time of the holidays, like we're here in the United States, Thanksgiving is coming up. So that's a time when families get together, and it's time sometimes when we'll notice a little bit of an uptick in visits to the site and people kind of looking for things, but it doesn't always maintain itself, right? So people kind of jump in, they see what they have, what we don't have, and then kind of pull back, and then that's it. So there is like that segment of the JewishGen audience, which is obviously always our challenge, is to continue to engage somebody when they do that. And then there are people who become very committed and passionate about doing research for themselves and also for others. And we also have, obviously, any professional genealogist who's doing work is obviously going to use JewishGen. We have in total hundreds of thousands of people who are registered for the site, and again, to different and varying degrees of activity. In terms of funding, mostly we rely on the people who utilize the site. We ask them, it's a free site. So that's also something important to remember. We're a nonprofit. We are the genealogy research division of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is based in New York City. But everything that we offer is as a free public service to the Jewish community. We want to make sure that if someone's interested in researching their family, that we will be there for them, and we're never going to put anything behind a paywall. But we do ask the people who use our site to donate. And it's sort of like a Wikipedia model. Wikipedia is free, but they put on top of the site, if everyone could please donate, $2, then we wouldn't have to fundraise anymore. And we do something similar where we ask people and say, most people don't contribute, which is completely fine. But if you are in a position to do so, please consider helping us, because you're helping us increases our ability to help you. So we do rely on our users. We rely on the people not only who use us regularly, but also who just recognize the value of what we are providing. And then we do focus on people who have capacity to give, larger gifts and investments into the organization and to long-term goals of what we're trying to accomplish. And obviously, we look for grants and things of that nature. So we kind of try to have multiple revenue streams coming in, which is a challenge, as you might expect in a nonprofit. And times of economic uncertainty obviously doesn't always mean that a site like a Jewish genealogical site is going to be top priority of everybody. Sometimes there are times that there are other things in the world that are going on that people prioritize, and rightfully so. I could tell you, just sharing with your audience that right now people are prioritizing giving money to Israel, which I fully support and agree with, and they should do that because that is, very critical, and it's a critical need. And in fact, we ourselves are trying to donate money to Israel. So whenever we have a program like this type of program, if it was on JewishGen and people would register and give a small donation, that money we are giving to the Barzilai Medical Center in Ashkelon in the south of Israel. So, everyone has to do their part, and we hope that while people prioritize, very critical needs, they will try to remember us as well, because, the organizations that exist still need to function. And, so we hope that people will continue to support us in that way.
No, thank you. And it's worth mentioning that medical center has been shelled, which hasn't got as much publicity as perhaps some other hospitals elsewhere.
Right.
As I mentioned, I researched both. Mostly I researched my Sephardic side, but when I look at the two sides of my family, when I'm doing Sephardic genealogy, it's very much of 17th, 18th century. Whereas if I'm looking at my Ashkenazi side, it's of 19th, 20th century. And I would perhaps define the Ashkenazi genealogy as being dominated by kind of two things. The single migration from Eastern Europe to, in my case, England, but obviously in other families to the United States and elsewhere, and also the Holocaust. Obviously, but my point being is these are really two very different areas, and I'm just wondering whether these different things, I'm talking of course about only Western Sephardic genealogy rather than others, can these different genealogies fit under a single umbrella? That's to say, is there really such a thing as Jewish genealogy? Ashkenazi genealogy is normally labeled as Jewish genealogy, but I just wonder very much if Sephardic and Ashkenazi genealogists are doing quite different things, if they actually belong under the same umbrella.
That's an interesting question. Maybe I would pose it, I would look at it a little differently. If you look at some of the big organizations, not commercial organizations, a site like MyHeritage or Ancestry, they're trying to ingest as much material as possible and make it accessible. And we're trying to do the same thing because we want to be as helpful as we can to people researching their roots. And the fact that there might be a little bit of a different modality or a different conceptually of how you would approach doing research from different regions or different communities doesn't mean that we can't provide that service. And we want people to recognize that we're all one people. And there's no reason why things have to be separate. It can all be under the same umbrella. We can all work together. And we've already started to do that with some of the data sets and the resources that JewishGen has been collecting and making accessible on the site. So I don't see why we wouldn't be able to offer both. And by the way, sometimes there are families that have both lines, right? There are Ashkenazim and Sephardic roots in people's families. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to provide a service that it makes information as accessible as possible in a centralized way. I would say that even, let's say, from the purely Ashkenazic perspective, which again, I think not everyone realizes that there is Sephardic content on JewishGen. But one of the things that we do is recognizing that there's material elsewhere online. We try to at least create a centralized way that people could do one search on JewishGen and at least be notified that something else exists on the web, even if it doesn't actually live on our site, because there's a value of doing your search and saying, oh, here's something that maybe I didn't think about. And I think the value of somebody who's doing a research on JewishGen and to have at their fingertips both Ashkenazic information and Sephardic information in a centralized location can alert you at the very least that something else exists. It might bring you down a path that you hadn't even thought to consider. And then, of course, for the people who know what they're looking for, you could leverage our tools. For example, we have something called the Family Finder. The Family Finder is a resource that allows people to connect based upon similar interests. So my last name is Groll. Someone goes online and said, is there anybody else with the name Groll? And if so, you can connect. Why would we want to exclude people who have Sephardic ancestry from leveraging a tool like that? It's something that's tremendous in its ability to connect people. It's very powerful. We have family trees that we put online. Why wouldn't we want to put on those trees? So I don't see it as, if anything, the more we are able to pull together under our broader umbrella, and the more people we bring together, the more opportunities there will be for people to be successful and to share information and to help each other. So that's how I would see this. Even if you say that some of the history of migration and things like that is a little bit different, but that's okay, right? And by the way, there's a separate element, which is it's okay to learn about other communities and what their experience was like. We have Yizkor books for both Ashkenazim and less so, but there are books for Sephardic Jews as well, like from Greece. Why should one community not know about the experience of the other? So that's what I would say. I think that we have the ability to bring people together, and the more people who come together, the greater our opportunity to understand each other, to respect each other, and to learn from each other, and also for the information that we are seeking.
Yeah, I mean, not wishing to embarrass you, but we would credit you personally with a change at JewishGen, which was, to be honest, previously seen as somewhat hostile. And obviously, originally, Dr. Jeff Malka set up his own independent site, SephardicGen, and now, of course, that content he has passed to you, which is obviously a very good vote of confidence, and also more recently, our friend Michael Was has started to work with JewishGen. Can you very briefly just give an overview of what Michael will be doing with you?
Sure. And first of all, thank you. I was getting nervous when you said you want to embarrass me. I wasn't sure where you were going with that. Again, I think that we call ourselves the Merkaz Olami. We are the central place. We're the global home for Jewish genealogy. That's how we look at ourselves. And therefore, there's no distinction, or there shouldn't be, between different types of material. We're all Jewish. It's one big, broad Jewish community. And so I think that I don't know if there's been so much of a difference in perspective in as much as perhaps we had less focus at different times. And part of that has to do with who was involved, right? What was the interest of the volunteers? And if people stepped forward to volunteer and they said, this is our interest, so that sort of became, but it wasn't because we somehow didn't want. So for example, when Jeff Malka, when we had this opportunity to go to Jeff and say, we'd like to expand our Sephardic offerings, we'd like to provide this service, we'd like to broaden our horizons, we'd like to make sure that people can gain access to this information. If you Google Jewish genealogy, you're going to come to JewishGen. Within the JewishGen world, how amazing would it be to alert somebody to Sephardic content? And even if you don't have any information or interest in about it, you might have friends who do. So I think that was always something very important. And to that end, you mentioned Michael. So a few years ago, we actually started a formal Sephardic research division headed by Serena Rafe, and we've already started working on some data sets. And this summer, we asked Michael to join our efforts to continue to strengthen the Sephardic research division and what it is that we're trying to accomplish, which is a variety of things. It's both programmatic elements and database elements, and trying to make sure that we provide the historical context of how people lived. So there's a vibrancy of our focus on Sephardic research, and Michael's playing a very key role in that effort.
No, I think that's really good. And to be honest, I mean, we're also seeing sort of changes. I mean, like Avatenu, of course, and Adam Brown there, especially with the Avatenu DNA project, is doing fantastic work. I do think, though, perhaps it is fair to say that in the past, and perhaps still in some quarters, Sephardic Mizrahi genealogy has been sort of ignored, whereas Sephardic genealogy has been sort of light entertainment. I mean, I think if I was given $1 every time I heard that somebody's ancestors had fled the Inquisition or like had a Sephardic surname, I would be rich by this point. But no, I'm really not. I think all of us generally are really happy to see that with you, and to be fair, obviously also with Adam Brown and others, the tectonic plates are finally moving, it seems. One of the differences that I perceive between Sephardic and Ashkenazi genealogy is that I've always perceived Ashkenazi genealogy, and maybe I'm just seeing it from a particularly British angle of our Jewish Genealogical Society here, but Ashkenazi genealogy always seems to be sort of militantly secular, whereas with ourselves, when a whole group of us were originally sort of setting up structures for Sephardic genealogy, we deliberately decided that we would include interested rabbis in our congregations, and that we would be discussing things like minhag and sort of dialects, languages spoken, and particular cultures. And when I look at Ashkenazi genealogy, first of all, I see there's very largely, and I'm asking you because you're a religious person, there don't seem to be that many religious people involved in Ashkenazi genealogy, or not so far as I can see. And also, I just wonder if it seems to me very often there's a cultural aspect missing. I mean, I'll give you just two for examples. Things like the gefilte fish line, between one side, Poland eating with sugar and the Litvaks on the other side eating with salt, which I personally know because I had grandmothers from each. But also things like sort of dialects of Yiddish, and whether somebody was ancestors were Hasidim or Misnagim or so on. It seems to me quite strange that within the Sephardic world, this is kind of fundamental, and in the Ashkenazi not. And I'm just curious. I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are, particularly, as I say, because you're somebody who is religious.
So now you're trying to get me into trouble, because whatever
Well,
I
no,
say,
I'm just curious, because it just seems to me that there's a whole area that just isn't being covered, and it just seems sad, because it's like it's
right.
it's just name collecting sometimes. It's not about really trying to understand who these people were, how they lived, what they believed, and stuff like that. I mean, it seems to me often there's no kind of cultural centering of ancestors. It's just names and dates.
Thinking it is an interesting question. I guess I would think about it in a couple of ways. In terms to your question of, the people who are involved. So I think I might push back a little bit because I don't know if it's what you would term secular, and I don't know if it's religious. I think JewishGen is very unique in that it is kind of uh, a very welcoming tent. And and I mentioned earlier that we are fueled by volunteers, and the volunteers come from very different backgrounds and perspectives and have different ways that they've come to Jewish genealogy. But what we all share is a commitment to the mission of preserving family history and heritage. And of course, people view history, well, the history is there, but people view the heritage in different ways, and what that looks like. But uh, it's a unique organization that we can all come together, and there are people who are religious and there are people who are not, and we are all united in that way. So it is a very interesting group. Um, I would say that in terms of preserving the heritage part, I mean, that goes to something that JewishGen tries very hard, which is you want to help people identify relatives, but you also want to help people understand the context of their lives. Like, how did they live? What were their values? What can we learn from them? And so we have some projects that are very heavily focused on the heritage part that have been paramount for a long time. One that I think of is our Yizkor book project, which I'm sure your audience is familiar with Yizkor books. But just to summarize for 30 seconds, these were books that were written by Holocaust survivors, mostly in the immediate decades after the war, upon the conclusion of the war. And they talk about the history of the towns and the development of the towns over, biographical sketches of famous rabbis and other people, what the politics were like, how did the Zionist movement manifest itself in their places, what were the holidays like, different times, and they end with what happened during the Holocaust, which, by the way, is incredibly valuable. These are firsthand testimonies in many cases of what happened during the Shoah, which is unbelievable to have that written so close after the war, or so close to the conclusion of the war. And we've been translating those books, and we have volunteers who are running it, and we have people who are donating to it and funding it. This is it's been a multi-million-dollar project over time. And that's very much a heritage piece. And all we're trying to do is make information accessible to people. And then it's up to individuals to decide, what they want to take from it. But the goal of the survivors when they wrote these books was to perpetuate, communal memory and legacy, and what their lives were like. That was their way of transmitting this history and culture that had been pretty much destroyed, to future generations. They didn't want people to forget about it. So I would say that there is a component to it, but we try very hard to be as big a tent and as welcoming to everybody as possible. There should not be a pressure to conform. We are the Jewish community is very diverse, and there are lots of different shades of how people view themselves, and JewishGen is trying to be there for everybody. So I would say that the matter of inclusion of rabbis, etc. There have been rabbis involved with JewishGen. In fact, there used to be, we used to have SIGs, which are called special interest groups, and now, as part of our kind of restructuring a little bit and trying to be a little bit more strategic in how we operate, we now have research divisions to kind of make things a little bit more focused. When people visit the site, they understand how things work and where you'll find different content, and we try to help the volunteers focus their efforts so they have to spend less time developing websites and more time on working on content and things like that. But there used to be a rabbinic SIG. There were people, Rabbi Avraham Marmerstein, who is a rabbi on the west side of Manhattan. He was very much involved in this, and there were people who were working on research of rabbinic lines. Serena Rafe has done some work in Syria, Sephardic and Mizrahi work that she's done, focusing on rabbinic information. So I think that there has been involvement, maybe not as um, publicized, because everyone has sort of done it as part of the broader mission of JewishGen. So it has less, the individual personalities have been less important, at least from my perspective. And so in terms of my own religiosity, that doesn't play a role in JewishGen. JewishGen is not a religious organization, and it's not a secular organization. It is a Jewish organization, and therefore we are there for everybody. Um, that's that. I don't know if that completely answers the question, but that's how I see
No,
it.
I confess to feeling unsatisfied. But maybe thinking about it, it's a particularly American thing, and Jewish genealogy has, largely grown in the United States, insofar as people are leaving an old country to the new country, and maybe some of the old country stuff gets forgotten. But as I say, it strikes me as strange and a little bit sad if people are not thinking about, well, were my ancestors Hasidic, were they Misnagim, were they this, were they that, and just that nuance, it just seems to be lost. And I mean, this is not obviously a criticism of you. It's just I'm just curious, as somebody who is religious, involved in Ashkenazi religious, involved in genealogy, where
I don't
you
know.
come
I
from.
don't know if that's completely. I don't know if that's completely accurate. We have So speaking about Yizkor books, actually, I could continue on that theme.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've done over the last few years is we've created holiday companions. So we have
Yes, they're
Hanukkah
very
coming
good.
up, and we'll have
I
us.
like this. Yeah.
I'm
But
sorry.
that's exactly the sort of thing that we're talking about, and you're doing it, which is great. But maybe that's a new development.
Well, I guess, just to describe what it is. So what we've done is we're taking excerpts from Yizkor books about how Jewish life, about how holidays were observed and celebrated in different communities at different times. And the idea being that we want people to look at Jewish community and communal memory, and that it's beyond just your own specific town. Because what we see happening a lot is like, oh, that's not from my town, so I'm not interested in it. And we want to say, no, it is, because it's our collective Jewish family history and heritage. And so we started putting these booklets together. We started with Passover, then we did the high holidays, and now we do Hanukkah. So we're trying to do it 3 times a year, and they're incredibly well received.
Very good.
There's thousands of people who are downloading this. Um, and I think that that is something that people are very much interested in, to read about how things were, how Jews lived and what their family was like, and whether it was Hasidic or was Misnagit. I think people are interested. Are there people who are not? Sure. But I think that sometimes it's our task and our challenge to help people and to illuminate and to open their eyes to the fact that maybe you should be involved in this. But I don't know if it's a willful lack of knowledge, to say we don't care. I think that when people are interested in Jewish genealogy, they're seeking something. So sometimes our opportunity is to help them and say, here's what you're looking for. There's different components of Jewish genealogy. And we see it as evidence by the fact that these projects are so popular and they get shared. Right? We have, it's always satisfying, at least to me, and I'm sure for the volunteers who work on these projects, to get success stories. I'm sure when you hear it, it's nice as well. So sometimes the success story is finding family, and that's very moving. And of course, there's many different elements of what it means to reconnect with the family. Because sometimes it's not always so simple. It's complicated. You have different personalities, you have different backgrounds. You haven't seen each other for a long time. You didn't know about each other. So the fact that connecting family sounds amazing, sometimes when you do it, it could be interesting. So when you hear these success stories of families reuniting and having reunions and things like that, it's nice. And then sometimes you just hear about people, yeah, I connected with a cousin, we learned about each other, and that's nice too. but sometimes you get success stories of how JewishGen has impacted them. So we've heard, we get feedback from the companions, and I've heard on multiple occasions, and I presume and hope that it's more, just people don't tell me, that people have taken the Passover companion to their Seder tables and read excerpts from it. Um, they've someone told we had a story a few years ago about how Passover was observed in Auschwitz. Actually, there was a Sephardic component because when Greek Jewry was deported and some of the Greek Jews were sent to Auschwitz, um, there's a story in the Yizkor book about how they brought with them provisions for Passover, and the people who were looking through their bags took some of that stuff out and used it. Um, and people brought that to their Seder table and read it as a way of remembering some of the persecutions that Jews have experienced over time, as we talk about in the Seder, in the Haggadah. When you hear these stories, to show the impact that genealogy is having on people's lives beyond just the actual reunion stories, but how it's strengthening their sense of Jewish identity, which is exactly what we want to do, because we want to inspire people to connect with their roots, to understand what it means to be part of the Jewish people. That's very important, and that's a role that it's playing. And I think that when we present it to people, it's very well received. And these are stories that are coming and filtering back to us from different communities. It's not just religious. It's not just, what you would call secular. It's people. They're Jews, and that's how we should look at each other. And obviously we see what's happening in Israel, and the community is coming together. And it's kind of breaking down divisions. And I find genealogy has that very unique ability. And sometimes it's you and I, and it's our responsibility to show people this is Jewish. This is your ability to connect with community. Um, so I really do see that as a tremendous opportunity to bring people together. I would say also that one of the challenges that we have, that we all have, in the genealogy sphere in space, is how to connect with younger people. And um, that's a challenge both demographically. It's also a challenge operationally, because you need younger people to help run things, right? You want people who can invest time and give energy and use skills and leverage modern tools and systems that they might be familiar with, and take on tasks and responsibilities, and to contribute to the vibrancy of an organization. And sometimes you have to make something in a way that's palatable. And a lot of times our demographics, which I'm sure you see as well, is that people who are involved in this are usually, post-retirement age, who have more time to spend. And instead of playing cards, they get involved in Jewish Gen and Jewish genealogy. So one of our challenges is, how do we make this more accessible to younger audiences? So one of the things that we did was we started a fellowship program where we take students in university to Poland for a 10-day trip to learn about Jewish life in Poland, and to ultimately clean up a cemetery. And the idea being that we're training them about genealogy, we're training them about how communal memory is preserved, in many cases by non-Jews who are preserving these heritage sites. And then we're giving them the opportunity to put thought to action. And as my wife says, when they clean up a cemetery, you're preserving history and heritage with your own two hands. And then what we hope is that it will inspire them to remain more connected, to learn more, to get involved, to think about us as they go through their careers, to contribute, to take on projects, to share the information with others. But one of the things that we do is we have reflection exercises both every day and at the end of the program. It's very much an intense work, and we try to help people focus their thoughts. How do they process what it is that they do during the day, and how do they process what the goal of the program was at the end of it. And this past summer, great group, and we finished in Lublin in Poland. And the last night, one of the students got up and said that as a result of this fellowship, he was inspired to learn more about his family. He was inspired to learn more about his Jewish roots, and that he also decided that he wanted to raise a Jewish family. That's what Jewish genealogy can do. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. And I think it is a tremendous opportunity. It's a responsibility, and it elevates genealogy beyond just a hobby. And and I think that it's exciting, and that's why I think we have so many people who volunteer, and the people who have the vision to see how this could really impact people. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
how I would respond to that.
I'm not suggesting you should send a mitzvah tank around to sort of, everyone who signs up, but something I have observed with our particular demographic, and of course the Western Sephardim, the Portuguese Jews, had a massive amount of assimilation. So a lot of the people, part of our, who belong to our group, are not Jewish, and yet there is a lot of interest in this religious history, cultural history, and so forth. And I'm so glad that you're tapping into that, because I think it's very I think it's core. Otherwise, we're just could be making a telephone directory, it seems to me. And in terms of
There's
age,
interesting things too. I would just mention that you could pull out things like we do in the Passover Companion. So you can pull out other things to make more focused kind of books. So you could pull out rabbinic biography, but you can also pull out Zionists who wrote in these books. You could pull out chapters written by politicians like Ben Gurion contributed to a Yizkor book. It's something that is our collective culture, history, and heritage. And when you mention assimilation and interest, one of the things that we found surveys and anecdotal conversation is that there was a very real effort upon Jews who came to this country, both Sephardic and Ashkenazi, right? If you think about the fact that most of the Jews who came in the early years, starting in 1654 and 1700s, were of Sephardic descent, but they wanted to assimilate. And when Ashkenazi Jews came, there was also a very real concerted effort. They wanted to assimilate into the new country. And what's happened over time is that some of their and when that happens, you often don't talk about where you came from in the same way that puts it on a pedestal. And you talk about and say, yeah, we came from here, but we're not doing that anymore. And so, their children and grandchildren grow up and they don't talk about their stories so much. And then now it's a few generations later and people wake up and say, but wait a second, who are we? Where did we come from? What was our culture? Where did we fall on the gefilte fish line? And what does that line mean? And who are the differences? And why were they different? And what, and now that's that's a responsibility of ours again. So as a result of that assimilation, that's also driving some of the interest because people don't know.
Yeah. And you were talking about age, and I think you make a good point there. I think, though, something I've noticed is that our group is a few years younger than most of the people we see on average in genealogy, and I suspect that's because we started online and more or less do everything online because we've got no money, so can't afford to do anything else. But I think you're completely right about younger people. I mean, I think we were all there. I mean, I could have asked my grandparents so many questions, and it literally never occurred to me until way too late. And then of course my parents didn't know the answers to those questions. But I think that's a very common a common issue. With so sorry, that was going off on a bit of a tangent, but one that kind of really
That was
really interests me.
interesting conversation.
It's yeah. I think it's really important just to remember these things, which of course you personally are doing within JewishGen. I mean, do you have an actual program? I mean, you've obviously got all of these databases, and you mentioned the work that Michael Wass is doing with Serena Raffay. Do you have particular goals? I mean, do you sort of decide one day that well, we need to go and get more databases on like Lithuania or Syria or wherever, or is it kind of quite opportunistic, just kind of what turns up and just grab what you can?
That's an interesting point. I would say it's probably a combination of both. I mean, that is par for the course, right? There are things that you go out and target, and there are things that present itself to you that you work hard to get. We have For example, on the Ashkenazi side, we focused very heavily over the last couple of years on documenting Ukraine Jewry and trying to push things forward with Romania and Bessarabia region and Subcarpathia and Hungary and Romania and Belarus, and various countries. We focus, we have Polish records that we've been adding. We have Polish content. Obviously the Yizkor books focus in many places in Poland and Ukraine and Belarus. So there are specific goals at the beginning of the year, like any organization. When we put together a budget, we think about what projects we want to focus on and how much they're going to cost and who's going to do it. And then there are things that happen throughout the year, and somebody says, here's an opportunity to look for. I would say when it comes to an opportunity that's presented itself, I would say that when it comes to Sephardic genealogy, we're doing the same thing. We set up this team, and Michael and Serena meet, and we should meet more regularly, I should say, all of us. Just like in any organization. And we've mapped out things like, for example, right now, Michael is surveying archives and record sets for projects in the Portuguese Jewish world and the Northern Mediterranean. That's a very specific goal in mind, what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And then there are other things that we, just obtained through relationship building and networking, right? We go to an IJJS conference. That's how we had, significant conversation, and we see what comes from it. So I would say it's a combination of both.
Okay, because we're in our little world of Sephardic genealogy, we face this problem, which is almost opposite from my Ashkenazi side. The Ashkenazi side, there's very little that I can find to dig out. Certainly, before the mid 18th century, if I've not really even got there yet. Whereas on the Sephardic side, there's just like libraries full of documents, be it Inquisition or community, because our communities were led by merchants who kept records of everything, and they lived in West European countries generally that also kept good records, and so we have a number of sort of different technology projects going on. One of which, A Nação Hebreica, led by David Silveira, is training artificial intelligence to read manuscripts, so we can Portuguese language manuscripts, so we can then ultimately automatically transcribe it. And there are other things going on as well, of course, because we're close to the Avatenu DNA project, and we're looking at geographical information systems and so on. Does JewishGen have any? I mean, it is very specialist, but do you have any sort of tech projects or sort of ways in which you're using tech in sort of new and sort of interesting manners?
So one of our big projects is a website modernization. We call it JewishGen 2.0. We want to first of all, we need to build a more sustainable site. We want to make it more accessible. We want to make it more user-friendly, but we want to leverage tools and technology to make Jewish genealogy easier for people. A lot of times people talk about AI. There's an opportunity there. There's also a challenge. Using AI for records, a lot of the Ashkenazi records are very complicated. Written in Cyrillic or whatever language it was in. So some of the languages are easier than others, perhaps, to run an AI on. But so there is that opportunity. We have engaged volunteers, have tried out some of the transcribe us opportunities. We've also talked to companies who do AI and kind of seeing what opportunities might exist for different types of data sets that we have. So we're always looking. We are focused on what we do and always looking for other opportunities to improve and make it better and have the ability to get more content and information in front of people, both in terms of records and also how people can search and find information as well. So it's an ongoing process, and as things get better and things become more accessible and things become cheaper, it will provide us different opportunities. And one of the things that we want to make sure when we redo a site, and it's not just a website, it's the organization. JewishGen is a digital organization, it's a digital asset, is we want to be sustainable, but also what people in the field now are telling me, it's called extendable. We want to be able to grow. We want to be able to incorporate new opportunities into our system without sort of saying, well, this is how we do it, and now we're stuck.
Yeah.
So it's something that's ongoing that we're always looking at. We're always trying to consider what we could do better, and of course, using the new emerging technologies that are becoming much more accessible is critical. Of course, we're looking at that.
Yeah, you should perhaps you should get David Silvera to present on the transcribers project, because it's absolutely fascinating. There is, I think there is a Yiddish project. There's a lot of German projects. I'm sure there's Polish and Cyrillic as well. Before we started the meeting, we were briefly discussing about one of my kind of, not bugbears, but something that troubles me a lot, that in terms of Eastern Sephardic and Mizrahi genealogy, and I'm especially talking about communities living in the Islamic world, there's not a huge amount available, and of course there's a lot of reasons for this. People got kicked out at short notice. Synagogues have been burnt down. Records have been scattered. In for example, Egypt, they're effectively confiscated by the Egyptian, or a lot of the records are confiscated by the Egyptian government. And Iraq, obviously, a lot of people know that story. But I'm just wondering if at some future date, sort of all of us who are interested in Jewish genealogy can have a project to cover these Islamic states better, because even when a lot of Jewish records are missing, very often the foreign consulates will have records, because often people had foreign protection or nationality, and there are law records from the law courts which are now just gathering dust in libraries in Western countries, and Masonic records and so on, and this is something I've been looking at a bit, and so almost the more I look, it just seems the more information there is, but it's quite difficult. And also, of course, most of a lot of the people that came from these countries live in Israel, and we're actually going to have Rose Feldman from the Israeli Society talk to us in a couple of weeks. But I just want to sort of throw out a pitch at you that. And certainly, I think this is something that Michael Wass is interested in as well. That there is a lot of information out there that we just don't really look at, and particularly, of course, in Turkey, in the Ottoman state archives, which is almost unexplored territory for us, and quite difficult because it's written in the old script and the old form of Turkish. So I just hope at some point, it's not really something to be answered, I guess, but I hope at some point we can start to dig there as well, because it's both fascinating and I think also within the geopolitics of the Middle East and sort of Jewish life and whatever, I think to establish that there were these communities there that had very, very, very deep roots is interesting and important.
Well, so it's interesting. You said a couple of things there that are interesting. First of all, just in terms of the collaboration, one of the things that we do is, or one of the things that are unique to JewishGen is that we are fueled by volunteers, but the volunteers themselves are experts, sometimes world-renowned experts in their geographic location, their geographical areas of interest. And so when it comes to these type of projects and collaboration, we rely on the people who are really experts to sort of guide us and say, like, here are opportunities, here are things that we're looking at, here's something that you could do to make a contribution to the Jewish community. So people like Michael and Serena, who have an interest in Sephardic genealogy, who could work alongside you and Tom, like, this is tremendous. Or Jared Ross, like there's a team of people in the Sephardic world that can help open this up. And then JewishGen can play a role in terms of, helping to fund projects and finding people to transcribe information and to put it online into databases and to create the overlay tools that can help people search it. So I think there's so much opportunity there, and the more that we work together, the greater the benefit will be to the broader Jewish community. In terms to the, to your other point, um, actually remind me. Oh, in terms of the other point, one of the things that I tell people is that Jewish genealogy is so much more than just names and dates, right? And we talked a little about this. It's about the heritage part and it's the contextual part of people's lives, but it has a very real impact on people's lives as well. So from a Jewish perspective, it can help you with medical research, right? You need to have a family history for genetic testing. Jewish genealogy plays a very, very critical role of being able to learn about family. It could help you with, unfortunately, because of the war in Israel, people want to join the army as a chayal boded, as a lone soldier, but from my understanding, you're supposed to be Jewish when you join. That's at least the way it's been explained to me. I don't know all the details. So someone told us that he wanted to join the army, and he used JewishGen to document his lineage. There's so many different ways that this could be used. JewishGen has helped people get a Jewish funeral, to show like, no, this person was Jewish. They should be buried in this particular place. And one of the things that Jewish genealogy can do is to stand against Holocaust denial. You say you want to remind people that Jews lived in these places. We want to remind people that Jews existed, and you say the Holocaust never happened. You say that these people, weren't killed. Well, really, here are the documents, here are the records of their lives. What happened to them? This past summer when we were in Poland, we visited a particular community, and the person overseeing the cemetery, who was not Jewish, had documented about 2,000 people who had been born and died in this town. And he said, where's this? Here's where are their tombstones? He said, clearly, if they died here, where are they buried? Right? So if someone wants to deny their existence, we say, no, 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 these records are here. We can track them and we could see where it stopped. So I think Jewish genealogy, as you mentioned, has a tremendous role to play in that place, in that sphere, in that space.
Yeah, I think also one of the things going forward is to sort of merge some of the DNA research with some of the archival research is probably one of the ways forward. I have spoken a lot, and Tom has kept a notable silence. I'm sorry, because there are specific things that really interest me. Tom, is there anything that you wish to?
He may not have been happy with my answers. I'm not sure.
What I would like to know is how you yourself got involved with JewishGen. Was it through genealogy?
So that's interesting. So I got involved because I was looking for a job. This has only been my second job out of college. Thank God I'm 40 years old. And when I graduated school, when I graduated with my bachelor's, I had a bit, it was a business degree, an undergraduate business degree, and I was working for what in essence was a tech company, and we were doing like payments in a specific for specific types of venues, online payments, and which was still emerging. It's not like what it is today. There was this idea that in certain places someone could pre-fund accounts and then access the money by putting in a PIN code, stuff that we would take for granted today. So that's what I was doing, customer support. And after a couple of years, I was looking for something else, and I was thinking about going for an MBA. And I saw a job posted for the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. And I told my wife that, look, there's this administrative job at the museum. I would love to work at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. What an incredible place. So I applied for the job, and thank God I was able to get it. It turned out that job to be an administrator was for JewishGen. And that was in 2008. And since that time, I've been very fortunate, thank God, to have various opportunities to grow and to develop and to play a part in expanding the organization, but really partnering together with the volunteers who have expanded the organization and broadened our reach, and and now giving me this opportunity to really oversee our work and our efforts. It has been, I really enjoy it. It's been not without challenge, of course. It's a nonprofit, and there's challenges in any organization, but with a nonprofit, you have your own unique set of challenges. But it's the people are wonderful. The satisfaction you get of being involved in Jewish communal work, and in such a unique way, and the satisfaction you get when you see people, how their lives have been impacted. I really like it a lot. I like meeting people, like you and David, that we've connected in this way. So it's for me, it's really been such a wonderful thing, and I don't really view it as work. I like doing this. Sometimes I'm overloaded and I can't do as much as I want, and I can't be as supportive and collaborative with our volunteer team as I would like to be. But that's just simply a nature of just how much work there is, because JewishGen is so big. And but it's something that I take, you take home with you. It's not something that ends at 5 o'clock. And so that's how I got started with it. And I hope, please God, that I'll be involved with it for a long time.
Thank you. That sounds like you don't have the time to do your own genealogy.
Well, uh, so some of the genealogy I know. I mean, thank God, on my father, Zichrono Livracha, his side was from what's today Poland and Ukraine mostly, and on my mother's side, my mother Alaa Shalom, she was a Yeki, so the family's from Germany. I'm a grandson of survivors. In fact, I was named after my great grandfather who was murdered in Auschwitz. Both my great grandparents were murdered in Auschwitz. So we have different sides of the family who came from different places, different times when they came to the United States. So I have done a decent amount of my genealogy, probably not as extensive as I could if I could really focus on it and kind of, push back a little bit more than what I have. Um, but I feel satisfaction in being able to, as we discussed earlier with David, the ability to connect people, to inspire them to learn more about what it means to be part of the Jewish people, that's very critical as well.
Thank you. David, I think we can conclude on that note.
Okay. Oh yeah. We are sorry. We always go on longer than we thought. Thank you very much for doing this, and to our viewers, because we don't normally. I can't remember if we pre-recorded before. I think we did once.
Yes.
We're just curious to know from our patrons how this works. Unfortunately, Sunday was difficult for you, and to be honest, I'm wanting to go to a demonstration here in London, so it worked out very well for me as well. We want to thank you, first of all, for coming and talking to us, and also for what you do, because I think you have certainly made a change in the world of Jewish genealogy, and we're very happy to recognise that and to look forward to a positive future. We will be back in 2 weeks' time, I think, looking at the Israel Jewish Genealogical Association and their archives, which of course are quite good for Sephardic genealogy. And Tom, would you like to close the meeting?
Yes. Thank you to our.
Can I just add something?
Of course.
We have a series of what we call JewishGen talks, basically educational webinars that we run on a weekly basis in the fall and the spring. And I just want to mention two things. One is we have a lot of Sephardic content both online on our YouTube channel and also what's coming up. We have a whole series, hopefully, with Dr. Alex Bader, who I'm sure your audience is familiar with, and Serena Rafe and Michael Wass, and others that will focus on Sephardic topics over the next 6 months. So I just want to, mention that. But specifically, yesterday we had a webinar with Ronnie Golan, who talked about doing genealogical research in Israel. So that's going to go on our site on the YouTube channel, hopefully today or tomorrow. And so I just want to, let your audience know if that's of interest. They can take advantage of viewing that online.
Yeah, we'll put a link on our YouTube for this talk.
thank you to our patrons for their support. Thank you to our viewers, both our patrons and those who watch the video on YouTube. And above all, thank you, Avraham Groll, for a very
Thank you.
interesting interview. We are very happy
Thank you.
to have you here on Sephardic World.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.